Welcome to a new special series of My Surrogacy Journeys podcast, Mexico City Edition Season 2, guiding American intending parents through surrogacy in Mexico City. How are you doing? Jess, it's me and you again.
Yes, I'm so excited.
And this is another topic that you're excited about.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. As a former academic, I just love learning and love data and love research. So like my nerdy little heart is coming out right now.
If you can see her now, if you're watching this, you will see the excitement on her face. We are live from our wonderful offices here in Polanco. So if you are watching and you can see our wonderful guest and the phenomenal backdrop, then yeah, we're here in Mexico City.
Absolutely. And just in case this is the first podcast that you're listening to, because like me, you love learning about things and you want that data. I'm Jess. I am a mom through surrogacy, and I am our membership manager. So My Surrogacy Journeys membership manager, supporting all of our wonderful American intended parents through their surrogacy journeys in Mexico City.
And I am Michael. I'm a dad to two through surrogacy in the UK. And myself and my husband, Wes, founded My Surrogacy Journey back in 2021 when we had our own journey and the challenges and the difficulties that we faced throughout that. So I'm joined by not only Jess, but we've got a wonderful guest with us. And I met this individual when I was at ESHRE in Amsterdam, I think this was. Tell us what ESHRE is, Jess.
So ESHRE is the European Society for Human Reproduction and Embryology. So it's basically a annual conference about all things
embryology and reproduction.
And human reproduction. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's equivalents that ASRM is the American equivalent that we often attend, and then you'll see us there too.
Yep, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine.
Well done. Look, it's rolling off the tongue now. And I watched a presentation, and I specifically wanted to go to this particular talk because it was on a topic that I and the team were really passionate about. And I'm not going to spoil any more. I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful guest. Tell us a bit about who you are, what you're representing, and let's dive into asking you some brilliant questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And yes, for those of you who can see, it is quite beautiful here.
It is.
I'm Dr. Brent Monseur. My pronouns are they and he, and I am a reproductive endocrinologist at Stanford University. And I am the director of the Q+ Clinic, which is a family building program entirely dedicated to LGBTQ family building. So we see all LGBTQ subgroups, and we're really trying to move academic medicine forward to be better prepared to teach the next generation of fertility doctors to be able to care for this population with special needs.
Mm-hmm. And I think, certainly from my experience and Wes's experience back in 2015, 2016, going through our journey, it was really clear that a lot of clinics just weren't prepared for dealing with all elements of the community, the LGBTQ plus community, whether it was forms, andrology, how people spoke to you, and even clinics that weren't even prepared to treat you. I think it's a really important awareness piece that we not only have and should be representing and educating people on, but certainly within your field, talking to people at your level and within healthcare about the importance and the needs of this particular community.
Yeah, and I think, I'm coming from a country that I think this happened in other places globally, but fertility care used to be only for folks that are married. Yep. And so before same-sex marriage was legal, which was very recent in our country, 2015, this was a service that kind of was only for cisgender, heteronormative relationships. And, there's still many fertility doctors that are in practice who trained during that time. Mm-hmm. Not saying that they necessarily have continued that in their current practice, but it wasn't that long ago that it wasn't even an option.
Nope.
So there are still many clinics that just don't have the tools to kind of change and adapt it to have a more inclusive practice. But thankfully, at least from the perspective of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, there are now very clear position statements that really, regardless of marital status, regardless of sexual orientation, everyone should have access to fertility services. And so that's really been kind of the focus of both my clinical and my research work.
And I'm in awe with the work that's just even done. There's some of the basics as well that we see here in the UK. From a clinics, EMR, or their systems point of view, just that is often a challenge, certainly for surrogacy or certainly managing trans or non-binary patients. Having systems that aren't going to misgender someone or are going to be respectful of their pronouns. There still isn't a system in the UK that is built to deal with that patient group. Do you see the same in the US?
Yeah, I definitely see the same. And I think, even in my, novel Q+ practice, we have the same challenges with the electronic medical record. We also have the same challenges with updating forms in a system that, there are lots of steps in an academic university to make even small changes. And so really the way that we approach this is that we kind of tell our patients up front that there are going to be the possibility for microaggressions or things that are going to be outdated, not appropriate for every patient. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of ask my patients, feel very comfortable to tell me when that happens, because I can use that as leverage to say to the clinic management that this is continuing to be an issue. We have another patient that's brought this up. And I never want to put the onus on the patient, but I more want to empower them to say, it's okay for you to tell us that we made a mistake.
Yeah.
Because I think we're never going to be perfect.
No.
And there's always room to be better. And I think there's a lot of talk about this idea of cultural competence, and it's almost like you can take a webinar on queer family building and then you'll be good to go. I think really the more of the gold standard is cultural humility, which is that this is going to be lifelong learning. Things are always going to change. Mm-hmm. Terminology is going to change. Mm-hmm. We're seeing more relationships that are not just single or couples, but different structures. And I think clinics are also not prepared for that. So we're all learning together. And I think we just have to let our patients know that we want to do better and we want to learn from them.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay, let's start with some of these talking points, Jess. Over to you.
Okay. Well, I'm actually going to go to one of the last talking points that I had, because it was actually, I had like 2 pages of things that I wanted to ask you. And so it was really hard to narrow it down. But since we've kind of already started talking about it, I know that Q+ is extraordinary because it is the first and perhaps one of the only fertility clinics in the US which specifically supports queer family building. Can you share a little bit more about why you felt it was important to form this clinic, how a clinic which supports queer families kind of specifically or exclusively differs from a quote unquote more traditional fertility clinic?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think for me, this really started many years ago. When someone comes out, a lot of times the first thing that they'll hear is, oh, but you won't be able to have children.
Yeah.
And I honestly have seen in a new generation, this is less common. Mm-hmm. I think it's more of, it's going to be challenging for you to have children, but people do view it as possible. But I kind of hearing that when coming out and kind of realizing that there wasn't really any resources on how queer individuals could go through family building, I basically decided, really kind of being stubborn, that I was going to go to school, figure that out, and help people do that. Yeah. That was kind of my mission. And so it was a 15-year journey for myself to get all of that training to do this. And so
that
really
is commitment.
Yes.
Q+ for me was really a culmination of all of that effort and time to really create something, by the community for the community. But I would certainly be remiss to say, I think privacy claims are challenging. There are, of course, other great clinics in the United States that do great LGBTQ care. I think where our model was coming from was, we're not trying to just necessarily do the best care for same-sex male couples or same-sex female relationships or gender diverse patients. We're really trying to do all of the different populations. And I think, at least in my role as the LGBTQ's leadership for ASRM, I've noticed that there is a lot of localization of certain programs do certain things better for certain populations. And we really wanted to do it all. And the last thing I really want to stress, though, is even though this has been my vision for a long time, it really would not have been possible without the support of my division at Stanford University. I had a really supportive director and colleagues. The chair of my department is extremely supportive of LGBTQ health. And without the support of the Stanford Medicine Children's Health, executive committee that approved our business plan, none of this really would have been able to come to fruition. And so even though this was an individual dream, it really ended up being a collective project. And it's something that I think we're all really proud of.
Oh, I'm proud of it. I think when you look at family building and you see the number of clinics that can support comfortably and respectfully. We all know it's few and far between. There's none in the UK. There are some that have some services, like you said, that will specialise in particular types of care. But to them receive full support and backing from someone like Stanford University as well. And again, that must have been, were you surprised? Or did you always know that this was going to be that way because of the organisation that they were?
I mean, I think I kind of had a vision that I think that I probably could have enacted at different places just because I was so determined. But I specifically chose Stanford University because I wanted to be in the Bay Area, which has the United States' largest population of queer individuals. I actually think it might be the largest population of queer individuals in the world. Don't quote me on that, but I know it's an extreme amount. And Stanford University had already started initiatives to be more LGBT inclusive through their adult LGBTQ health program. So there was kind of the groundwork there to kind of build on something that was already present. And so when I interviewed for my job for fellowship at Stanford University, I kind of said, this is the vision, right? So I'm coming here to do this. So obviously I have to do my fellowship training first.
Like Shark Tank.
I have to do all the check marks, but it was no surprise to anyone that that's what I was planning to do because I told them before I even arrived. So I felt the support very early on.
Perfect. Love.
Yeah. And that's amazing that, not only were you so passionate about it, but you were able to share and be supported in your passion, and have the backing of a university like Stanford. I mean, with such a world-renowned program, that's amazing. And I'm sure your patients are grateful that you persevered and were so stubborn.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really has been actually fun is I now have, since I did my fellowship training there, I have a lot of patients that I saw when it was really just me as a fellow. And we get a lot of kind of graduated autonomy so we can take care of our own patients even when we're in training. But then, so I now have them coming back for round 2 for their second baby. And they're now seeing like, wow, like the program has grown so much. You have a dedicated IVF nurse, a dedicated physician assistant. You have your own patient care coordinator.
It's all grown up.
And it's, they're kind of, it's fun to see from their perspective that their experiences are better.
And progress.
And they're just excited. Like they were excited to come back and like they now know the team. It's not just me. So
let's talk about the team. Come on, let's tell us more about Q+. Tell us how it differs. What are those services that you and the team are really proud of? Talk us through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think really from the ground up, the way that this was envisioned is it was a team that was specifically hired to do LGBTQ family building. And I think that really makes all the difference. It's not like this is a team that does third-party reproduction and they also are getting more experience with LGBTQ health. We actually have a third-party reproduction team. So this is a separate team that is specifically focused on LGBTQ family building. And so it's really not necessarily one unique service or one unique thing. What it is that anytime something comes up, we have a dedicated person at all the different, roles in the clinic that is committed to making this a better experience. So everyone on the team has their own quality improvement projects. So we're always trying to make things better. And we also are just kind of, because each of us have kind of taken the time to get our own additional training to be more competent in this area, we now also can help anyone else in the clinic when they have questions. Because, the vision isn't that I'm the only doctor that sees our LGBTQ patients. We all share, it's a group practice, but we now have a whole team that can answer questions for any of the other team members that maybe aren't as experienced in that one particular area. So that's really been what I think has been the most impactful, because I think what happens in a lot of clinics is that maybe one person is more interested in that, and so that kind of everything falls to them. But what happens when that person's out? Or when
we see that all the time.
Absolutely.
Especially with surrogacy departments within clinics. Janice isn't in today, so everything stops for a week. You see that, when that knowledge is not spread throughout the team.
Yeah, and we've made a really concerted effort to do a lot of cross-training. So our people on our team can help out with other things, and then they've taught people to, when they're out, how to help out. So it's really just been great. And I think, case in point, I'm here in Mexico City at this great conference. Thank you all for having me. And I know that my team is back at home and they still feel well supported because I have things in place to kind of keep things moving.
Amazing. So obviously Q plus is, a huge part of your everyday professional career, but you also have your academic and research side, which is how Michael found you in the first place.
I was in awe of that phenomenal presentation.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your research on cross-border surrogacy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, part of the vision of creating Q Plus at an academic university, right? This is something that could be done. I think other people should take initiative to do this in private practice models as well. But the vision of doing this in an academic university was so that patients can actually be involved in research. Because queer patients, and actually in particular same-sex male individuals and couples and relationships, have really been excluded from reproductive medical literature for a long time. And so I wanted to be able to build a program where we can kind of start changing that.
Yeah.
So this whole idea of kind of looking into same-sex male reproduction was actually not about cross-border reproductive care.
Oh, really?
It was actually the impetus for this project was this is a community that's never included in research, basically at all.
Yeah.
And so in 2017, the Society of Assisted Reproductive Technology, or SART, began collecting data in a way that you could identify same-sex male couples. And I say couples because in the database, it's really either single individuals or couples that are captured. And so the purpose of this project was just to look at same-sex male couples really for the first time in this national data set that has almost 500 clinics in the database. The reason that it became more of a focus on cross-border care is that when we looked at about 6,000 cycles, 3,000 of those cycles were actually from intended parents that were traveling outside of the United States into the United States.
And that's what surprised me.
And I can't believe it's
so we pivoted and that became a really interesting thing that we kind of maybe anecdotally knew, but we were shocked the numbers were that high.
And this was presented to everyone here yesterday, and you heard people go, you had the gasp.
Audible gasp.
Yeah, it was, there were heads being turned, and when I first saw it, I exactly thought the same. Half of that treatment cycle was from intended parents that were not in the US.
Yeah, there was one of 23 different European countries represented. And I think our most, the most cycles were coming from intended parents from China, France, Israel, Spain, and the UK.
UK, yeah, definitely.
And those numbers change by the year and when policies change. But yeah, it was a really kind of unexpected finding to have it that high of a number. And so that's kind of how, once we found that out, that's how the folks at Esri then invited me to come speak, because they were just so interested to hear that data for the first time. So even though this kind of started as a domestic kind of endeavor looking at just cycles in the US, it really turned into something so much bigger. And I think outside of LGBTQ family building, this idea of cross-border reproductive care into the United States is often not talked about in any population.
No.
It's usually the focus is leaving the US or leaving Western Europe to go to other places for care. So it was just kind of a neat angle to be a part of. And hopefully this will be published very soon. I'm writing up the manuscript now. So
and is this something that you want to keep updating, and as that, because we're seeing some really interesting trends only from what I'm seeing from the UK in terms of what those numbers are looking like from your data set to where we are today, because we've seen some of those numbers potentially decline, and then other destinations disappear as well from that landscape, with certainly the Chinese population not coming as it was anymore. And there's some big changes to what those treatment cycles will look like. Are you planning to continue or add to that?
That's absolutely the plan. So our data set, it kind of feels like old news now because it's actually from 2017 to 2020. There's time to get the data lags slightly behind. But so it's kind of already, it would be worthwhile to repeat the study, basically, by the time that this actually comes out and gets published. What I can say is that cross-border reproductive care into the United States, if we're looking kind of at all populations, has really been increasing for over the last decade. And I think the main exception was during the COVID pandemic, but we're seeing the numbers increase. And I really think that it will continue to see it rise, particularly for the same-sex male population, which has really been increasing at a faster rate than other populations, which is what we also saw.
Yeah, and we've seen that in Europe as well, where same-sex male couples or individuals can access third-party or surrogacy. We're seeing that percentage increase greater than heterosexual people approaching surrogacy. We've seen that. So, and kind of since same-sex marriage was legalized in the UK, we've definitely seen that gather more aggression and that gap close.
One of the areas that you were specifically looking at in this research in terms of cross-border care were kind of hotspot locations where intended parents were coming to for their treatment. Can you share a little bit more about that and what your findings were?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are these places that have kind of been codified as reproductive hubs in the literature. And California has been one that's really been identified for quite some time. And it's particularly true for same-sex male couples. Yeah. And I think a lot of that is driven by the fact that there are a lot of clinics in Los Angeles that have been inclusive for a very long time, seeing different communities. Mm-hmm. There's also a lot of surrogacy agencies that are based in California. Mm-hmm. But I think probably what really drives this to continue to increase is that there is so much positive LGBTQ family building support in the state of California, long history of progressive policies. There's the ability to have pre-birth orders. And it's just really makes it a destination, not only for international patients, but it's a destination for domestic patients as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think what's also really interesting about the United States landscape, which is probably similar to other countries, it's really a state-by-state situation. And so this really stresses the importance of reproductive attorneys. You can't really predict based on political parties what state might be a better state to do a gestational carrier cycle than another, because you can't assume that laws are going to follow a certain political party. You really have to look at each individual state. And so, for example, there are a lot of cycles that happen in Texas. Yeah. And then historically, there weren't a lot of cycles in New York because it was illegal until recently. And then very recently, Michigan passed, it's now legal in Michigan. So these are things that are changing all the time. And I often wish that there was just like a table that just showed kind of, these are
We've
the policies,
tried to make them, but it's just
these
not.
States and these countries. It's a lot for intended parents to really like overcome on their own. And so that's why agencies and, different concierge services can actually be really helpful to kind of navigate all of these different things to kind of build the family that you want to build.
Yeah. And even then, even if you did have that table, it's not entirely straightforward, is it? I mean,
There's a lot of asterisks.
Right.
Footnotes,
Right.
Stars, crosses, all sorts.
Exactly. Like, just from a personal perspective, my surrogate lived in Arizona, which if you see any surrogacy table, like, don't go to Arizona because there's no state laws, whereas actually they accept contracts from any other state. So it was incredibly easy and legally safe to do it in Arizona because they accepted our contract from Illinois, which has a great surrogacy system. We got a pre-birth order. So, there's so many nuances, I think, in terms of what's safe, what's legal, how that interplay works. Yeah. That, as you said, you really need to have that support system of agencies, of lawyers, of clinics who understand that. So, I mean, California is obviously a really big destination. You already talked about Texas, which I think when you presented, or when your paper was presented yesterday, I think a lot of people were surprised that Texas was such a kind of a hotspot in terms of, destination for surrogacy. What are some other ones that,
it's also a large, Texas has a large population.
That's true.
And it's pro-business as well, isn't it?
That also really drives it. Something that I also see is, there's not that many of us, we're kind of unicorns, but there are, a handful of reproductive endocrinologists in the United States that identify as a sexual or gender minority or both. And so I actually do think that also drives numbers. And so I've also seen some hubs that are kind of like, I know the doctor that practices there. And so I think that also drives it. I think one really robust practice is one by Mark Leondaris, who is based in Connecticut. And he was actually, and is going to be the senior author on the paper that we're writing together for this data. And so that's also really important to me, that we kind of have queer scientists and physicians that are contributing to this literature to like move it forward. And so that's another kind of driver that we see.
Was any of the research that came out of this project, was there anything that was a surprise that you then took into your practice? Was there anything that was like, okay, this is different, we need to adapt how we do things at Q+? Was there any surprises?
So, I mean, certainly I adapt my practice to follow evidence-based guidelines whenever I can. But I think, my lens and kind of how I approach this is I really think about population medicine and changing policies and impacting large groups. So when I see this data, this national data set, it often isn't my first thought like changing my own clinical practice. It's kind of, can we change clinical practices on a larger scale? So, for example, almost 100% of the cycles were using ICSI, or intracytoplasmic sperm injection, which the evidence really shows that you should be doing that in cases of male factor infertility, which a very small percentage of patients had in the data set. It's possible that this was driven by a lot of cycles that were using frozen eggs, and that's an indication. But what we're seeing is that there's kind of these add-ons that are happening at a higher rate than I might expect.
Okay.
So PGTA is another example where I believe it was almost like 70 to 80% of cycles were using PGTA.
Tell our listener what PGTA is, please.
Pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidy. So it's kind of testing for the number of chromosomes in the embryo to kind of see if that is the number that we would expect. And I think, there's a lot of controversy around PGTA right now, for those that are aware. The evidence base just hasn't been that strong that it actually increases success. But when you think about using that technology in a population that's using a young donor egg, even the theoretical benefits are not really there for the technology. And so these are technologies that are adding sometimes a couple of $1,000s to an already expensive journey. And so it's kind of just making me a little apprehensive of, are we making this a more expensive journey?
Because of that community, or because generally, or because it's already a challenging road enough. And especially for queer family building that, often finances can be a challenge for some people too.
Absolutely. And, it's like, and so I want to know, there's a need for, this was a quantitative study. We're looking at kind of epidemiological data trends, but there's a need for also qualitative and mixed methods work where we're actually interviewing doctors, patients, surrogacy agencies, and asking what were the drivers for these clinical decisions? Like, was it just like, oh, our clinic does that for everyone? Did the patients request it because they thought maybe perceived success or risk mitigation? We really should just figure that out, because I want to make sure that we are doing the best for our patients and not kind of increasing costs really without actual gain.
Because I know in the UK with the HFEA, PGTA is listed as it's a treatment add-on, but it's not listed as one that will improve live birth rate, reduce miscarriage, but not live birth rate. So it's always, the data set in the UK is still fairly small, but it's always one of those red on the traffic light system of treatment add-ons. And what you're saying is exactly, was this really necessary? Was it a clinic that was just doing that particular service because it's just baked into how they work? Or was it missold?
And this is something that we see a lot in queer family building, and something that we try to deconstruct at our clinic. There are a lot of times where there are assumptions that works for a cisgender, heteronormative, infertile patient or couple. We just do the same thing for the queer patients. And I think we see that a lot in our same-sex female couples, for example. So we see these patients sometimes getting fertility drugs when they don't have infertility, and then we don't increase their chance of success, but we increase their risk of multiples. So we're kind of causing harm, essentially, when we think we're doing the right thing.
That's fascinating.
And so that is something that we're also trying to identify by looking at large data sets, because the thing is...
And the patient group, rather than just...
Exactly, because these are, sexual and gender minority patients just haven't been looked at in reproductive medicine. So we don't actually know. There's this assumption that they'll get pregnant easily because they don't have infertility. And so that can be a good thing because you might not over-treat, but it can be a bad thing if you then miss that. We would still expect that a certain population is going to have infertility regardless of their sexual orientation.
I totally.
So it's kind of like there is a balance that's missing because these patients have been absent from the literature. We just kind of don't know what to expect and what the outcomes look like. So that's what we're really trying.
That's your next set. That's another patient group to look at.
Can you come back in 2 years?
You've got 2 years, okay?
This is so fascinating, and it's such a shame that that it really hasn't been looked at before from so many different levels. And why do you think that, and forgive me because I'm obviously not as familiar with the literature as you are, but why do you think it has not been at the forefront? Because, even take aside, and I don't like stepping back from specifically looking at LGBTQ family building, but things like PGTA, why has it become the norm when actually in some ways, regardless of population, it could potentially be causing more risk and more harm than good? Why do you think it has become the norm in cycles?
I mean, I think a lot of fields fall victim to this idea of kind of like, quick uptake of something that's new and exciting.
This is how we do it now.
And I think like another example of that is like the ERA, the endometrial receptivity assay, where kind of people were getting these endometrial biopsies to time their embryo transfers better. And then it kind of came out, oh wait, like that really doesn't work.
Yeah.
It might actually hurt, but like people were doing that for years. So I think it's, I actually love the ESHRE kind of green light, red light system. I think it's a really good thing that we should be following, because you really do need to have clinical evidence before you kind of give something to the masses. I think what is challenging in a field and a time where we love technology, a lot of times, I will counsel my patients that they don't need PGTA, but they want it because it's available.
Yeah.
And
they've probably heard
and they've heard about it.
And they don't want to miss out.
And it's also marketed that is helpful. So even, so there's a lot of unlearning to also be done. And so I think, medicine, right, as we know, has been very paternalistic in the past. And so we really want to have shared decisions. And so you don't want to shoot down a patient that says, I really want to do this. And you're like, oh, well, maybe the evidence doesn't show that. So it really has to be a conversation and really individualized to each patient, each couple, each relationship about, does this actually make sense for you? And then ultimately, it really should be a shared decision, I think.
I can carry on like there's 101 other questions, and I'm thinking this is going to be a 2-3-parter episode. What's next? Because what I like about what I see and what we've read is you have a responsibility for the community and for your profession, and you had that calling to create Q+, and you're doing a bloody good job. People like you are always wanting to push on that next door. What's the next door? What is it that you want to look at? Can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I think, from a research perspective, I think what's still missing is kind of these prospective longitudinal studies. What we do now is like one point in time, or we look back. And so we're kind of limited because we didn't design the study to kind of look at things from the outset. So I think that's really where I want to move forward with Q+. Like we have patients that are coming, let's enroll them in research, and not only research focused on sexual and gender minorities, but let's enroll them in research for reproductive medicine in general. We have multiple trials at my site. But I think maybe just more broadly, what I really want to move into is this idea of kind of, access is not inclusion. And I think that, it's great that we have all of these statements and policies that say that everyone should have access to fertility care. But when it is so expensive, particularly, I think the most expensive example is often a same-sex male couple where it's about $150,000 to $200,000 per child. So having a policy that says you should have access to that doesn't really mean anything if you're not able to afford that.
Absolutely.
But there has been a lot of movement. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine redefined infertility in the fall of 2023, much more inclusive definition now. And so what really needs to happen is physician advocates like myself that make sure that it's not just a policy, that it's a policy that then insurance companies update their policies. And
fertility benefit providers.
There's now better coverage.
Yeah.
And then once there's better coverage, making sure that individual doctors know that, making sure that the healthcare system knows that, the hospital, the clinic, everyone. So it's kind of like implementing these policy changes to actually make sure that it makes a difference and people being able to actually access this care. Amazing. Oh my gosh.
That's a nice line to finish the podcast.
Even though I have 1,000 more questions.
We will color them later.
Yeah.
Okay, look, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. My head's spinning with other stuff that I'm thinking I want to talk about. I hope it managed to kind of answer any of your questions. We're going to be putting all of the details in the show notes. So if you do want to reach out to Q+ or to Brent, then you are more than welcome to. Best bit, Jess, what's your takeaway?
Oh my gosh, there's so many to choose from, but I just think it's it shouldn't surprise me how excluded LGBTQ plus parents were, or prospective parents were, from the research, and how so many clinical decisions are based on populations and demographics that don't necessarily reflect the reality that they're going through. And it's such a shame that, there's so many barriers, extra barriers for certain populations to get pregnant. And then when the clinical side doesn't necessarily match their experience either, it just makes it harder. So again, I don't know why that's necessarily surprising to me, because sadly, research just in general has been very heteronormative and cis male focused, in many areas. But this, I think, just really highlighted it to me. So I'm so glad that you're doing this research and that you have this clinic to really support LGBTQ plus parents, and really help make those decisions that specifically fit them and their needs, rather than just like a general population.
Like a one size fits all. Yeah,
exactly.
Let's shoehorn you into this type of treatment. I think what was powerful was the equality, or equity is not inclusion. When you access is not inclusion. We see there's several projects that we're involved in the UK, which is the IVF for All campaign in the UK, and we're still seeing trans people and non-binary people and gay men still excluded from IVF for All and being a zip code or postcode lottery, and it shouldn't surprise me, but it just still saddens me that this is still happening, and the world is still a scary place for a lot of people, and in some parts isn't getting better. So I just applaud your work. I think we need more people like you at your level, in your sector, in your space, continuing to educate others and to push on the doors of policy and research, and to keep doing this wonderful stuff, because the room was absolutely captivated yesterday. So I know, and I've probably seen your presentation about 4 times now, because I keep watching it. And I'm like, it's really good. We need to do some more stuff with this paper and this data. So thank you so much for coming along and being involved.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome.
All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed today's episode, and that it answered all of your questions, or maybe brought up some things that you didn't know, or are getting. Or, oh my gosh, I can't even speak. Okay.
It's the end of the day almost.
Oh gosh, it's the end of the day. Let me start that again. So we hope you enjoyed today's episode and it answered any questions or curiosity. And if you want to learn more, please reach out to us or to Brent, because we would love to answer more.
Brent, can you share some details, please? How can people get in contact with the clinic? How can someone get in contact with the clinic that is listening or watching today?
Yeah, absolutely. So qplusfertility.stanfordchildrens.org. We have our own website that kind of is in addition to the Stanford Fertility Reproductive Health website. So you can Google that. You can Google me. That should come up. And yeah, I'm always happy to meet and chat. This is my passion. So
we can see
I too could talk about this.
You can forever. Yeah. Get in contact with him, please. Thank you. Don't forget, there's another episode available wherever you get your podcasts, via either Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, or if you're watching on YouTube. Just don't forget to click subscribe and hit that notification bell.
Absolutely. And if you want more information about My Surrogacy Journey services, our pathways, or really anything else, please head over to www.mysurrogacyjourney.com, and we would love to help you figure out the best way to build your family.
So thank you for listening today. I hope you enjoy the rest of this season, but don't forget to subscribe and feel free to leave a review if you've enjoyed it too. It's been helpful. I've loved chatting again on this one. It's just another fab episode that we just needed to do. So until next time.
Yeah, hasta luego.
Hasta luego.